Well, it turns out AI doesn't do a very good job of learning from what it just did, other than memorizing. Someone will find this conversation 10 years from now and say, what an idiot. But I'm going to say it anyway. Um, Quantum AI comes along, whatever that is, because no one knows, that will be unimaginably disruptive. And it will allow things that we don't have language or capacity to understand right now to address that future. That future is almost certainly coming. In a quantum computer, they have qubits, which are kind of like these little buckets of infinity that also influence each other. It's a completely wacky environment, has nothing to do with a traditional digital computer. And so things that are computationally impossible or computationally overwhelming, even easy. We can create a digital twin for a city. We can create a digital twin for a hospital environment. And then we can test things on that digital twin to see how different scenarios might play out. So instead of trying to reorganize the workflow in the hospital, we can try out three different workflows and in this digital twin and see which one works better. And that's actually being done right. You might be able to do things that are just magic that we can't imagine today. So that's one. And generally speaking, if there's one, there's more than one.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. Since the beginning of August, we started this topic of age of abundance or maybe sustainable abundance. And I had asked a guy I went to school with. And I guess that dates both of us a little bit. Anthony Scriffignano, thank you and welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be here with you. And complete disclosure, we were both adults when we went to school together. So it was going back to school together.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but it was still cool school, and we were both there, so that counts, I believe. And I mean, I have to say, I mean, I've always looked up to you for your amazing career and the things that you've been doing, and you have helped me at the beginning, especially when we were in that doctorate program, because as you may remember, I had the hardest time to read fast enough. So some of the tricks that you taught me were very, very helpful. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I remember, you scope out the room and you figure out who you resonate with. I think we clicked in about 8 seconds.
Yeah,
It was amazing.
yeah. Well, basically the nerdy guys, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you were the cool guy, but anyway.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's just the accent. For the audience who doesn't know you yet, Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about your background? What was your career, what you're doing now? And maybe I know you did a little bit in the investing realm, even though it was different real estate than what we are doing, but maybe you can touch on that a bit as well.
Sure. So I've had a pretty long career. I've been working in computer science and data science for more than 40 years, probably going on 45 now. I had more hair when I started doing this. I originally thought I was going to study physics, and I actually studied it a fair amount before I switched over into computer science. And then I've worked in the field, and I've done a lot in the field and across a vast variety of applications from pharmaceuticals to manufacturing. I worked on construction equipment on very large construction sites. I worked in management consulting. I was the chief data scientist at Dun& and Bradstreet, which is arguably the largest commercial database of its type in the world. That required me to work all over the world. I've done a lot of inventing of things. I have many patents to my name. So I've done things in geospatial inference, identity resolution, fraud detection, a lot of technology to help find bad guys doing new bad things, especially in the financial sense. From an investing standpoint, I have the rare distinction of working for a company that was a public company that went private and went public again and went private again. I believe it's now private. Been through that back and forth on both ends from a senior leadership perspective. Very interesting. Got to learn a lot doing that. And I've worked all across the fintech sector. So investors investing in stuff and trying to figure out green and lean and agile and all of the different buzzwords that have come up for, how do we figure out the next big thing? What's the impact of crypto? What do we do with the destabilizing geopolitical environment and the complex supply chain dynamics and all that? So I've been in all of that all around the world. So it's been quite a ride. And right now, I guess I should tell you, I am a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center, which is a nonpartisan Washington, D.C. think tank. And I got the opportunity to get involved with some amazing work there. And as well, I'm doing some other work with a private venture related to space.
Okay, yeah, very cool. One thing I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if it's still in your portfolio or not, but I remember, and this is admittedly quite a while ago, that you had also invested or bought or partially bought a hotel.
Yes, I was part of an investor group, didn't know anything about hotels, and but I knew something about the investors, and they were great people. And one thing led to another, and I found myself on the board of a hotel. It was 97 rooms in upstate New York, and it was beautiful, absolutely magnificent. I did not run the hotel. I didn't have anything to do with the operation, but you get involved with the decisions that are being made and the choices that you make. And we literally built it from the ground up. So when we started, it was a lot, and when we finished, it was a very successful property.
Are you still involved with it, or did you divest
We
it?
sold it. No, we sold it right before COVID, which is probably a good time to sell a hotel.
Yeah, that was smart.
No, it wasn't smart. It was just lucky.
Yeah.
There's a great line from the musical Pippin. It's smarter to be lucky than it's lucky to be smart. So
Yeah, very good. Cool. But I remember that you had told me a little bit about it and some of the experiences, and I always felt there's at least a little bit of a bridge to real estate in that sense. Now, the season that we're calling it right now for the podcast, we're calling that the season five, the age of sustainable abundance, but not so much claiming that it's here, but basically for our existing clients and investors, but also to the audience listening to us or reading on Substack or any other places where we are present, to be advocates to become prepared. So I kind of like to start there and ask your opinion, whether you apply that terminology or not, or if you just call it AI or whatever you prefer. Where do you see it now, and where do you see it going from your really deep involvement in technology?
yeah, I mean, I'll tell you how I see that from my chair, and you can tell me if I'm missing the mark in terms of your question.
Okay.
The hardest thing about talking about anything is getting the nouns right, right? So,
Right.
um, we definitely live in an age where a lot of things that we thought were science fiction have all of a sudden fairly quickly started to become not so science fiction, right? There is more data than anything can use, even Gen AI. There's just so much data out there, and it's increasing at a rate that is arguably unmeasurable. There is more compute power now than we ever imagined, and still with things like AI, we say, well, gee, if we had more compute power, we could do more, run these transformer models and make our Gen AI better. Maybe that's what we need to do. Um, Maybe we need to be a little smarter about how we're consuming that data. I think that the world is um, probably getting slightly starting to get over being drunk on, Gen AI and starting to realize that, there are some amazing things you can do, some really stupid things you can do, and you get to pick. And you have to ask yourself some questions about why would I expect the answer to the question that I have to be in the data that's in the AI instead of just expecting to push the button and get the answer. We certainly are living in an age where you feel like you can get any information you want at your fingertips. That's actually an illusion. A lot of the information that we want deals with what I call and what many people call novel behaviors, things that have never happened before, and things for which there's no historical precedent. AI doesn't do a very good job with those things unless the novel behaviors kind of look like the next step in something. I like to give people the example. If I say to you A, B, and ask you what comes next, you'll probably say C.
Right.
And then I could say, well, no, it's O because I was doing blood types. Like you have no idea without any context and without any idea of why I'm asking the question or from what perspective you're expected to answer, it's tricky. So abundance, yes. Opportunity, yes. Also risk. And, sadly, the human beings of the world are just as likely to use technology to, beat each other over the head better as they are, or to try to sell more shoes and socks than they are to solve some unsolved problem that could really change the human condition. So I think we get to pick how we use all this abundance that we have right
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes in some of the direction that I'm seeing as well, where I would say that kind of abundance is probably, if I had to label it, something like access, right? Quick access, at least perceived quick access to information, not because it isn't existing, but it used to take a long time and was kind of hard to bring together or ask a question. And it's different because it's, in my opinion, more personal, at least feels like that, than a Google search. But what I'm getting at when I think about Age of Abundance or sustainable abundance goes a little bit more towards embodied AI. Would you venture to go with that for a little bit and where you see it going?
when you say embodied AI, do you mean like automata and things that look like people doing things for us? What do you mean by that term?
Well, for me, embodied would be one variant of that would be, and I'm a big Tesla fan, would be basically autonomous driving, for example.
Yeah,
Embodied would be Optimus or Figure 2 or whatever the next version is in that direction. Those kind of
okay.
things where we don't just say we have data that we can access. And I know there are some people who say, since you mentioned pharmaceutical, and I've been doing a lot of work there, that there are really interesting or unanswered questions that people that are smarter than me think can be answered with simulations that don't take 1,000 years, right?
Yeah,
Those kind of things, I would say it's a little bit of a definition question. What would you all consider under the term embodied? But to me, maybe it's a little bit of a fancy word for in application rather
yeah.
than accessing information, right?
So let me frame it slightly differently and see if you're okay with it. There's two directions that you alluded to.
Hey, pardon the interruption. Thank you for being here. Thank you for enjoying the show. I wanted to ask you something and I wanted you to be aware of something. So, we did a little bit of research and we found that the vast majority of people who watch our videos and watch our show are not yet subscribed. So, what I really want to ask you to do is create a win-win-win situation with us. Subscribe, put a thumbs up if you like the show, and ring the notification bell. You're helping YouTube out a little bit, so it will suggest more of it to you. So, thanks for being here. Thanks for subscribing. If you really want to go all out, please give us a cup of coffee or even consider to give us super thanks. So, thank you and back to the show.
There's two directions that you alluded to there. One is what's often called edge, or you might think of the Internet of Things, where the computation is happening in the device at the point where the device is operating. And the Internet of Things is an interesting term because it's not, until recently, it was an Internet of Things connected to the Internet, right? So
Right.
devices, sensors, transducers, all these different things, factory settings, the thermostat and the fire extinguisher can talk to each other, that kind of thing. But now it could be a car or a drone or something that is not necessarily connected to anything when it is using its AI and its data on board and its programming. And there are some amazing, obviously, there's some terrifying things that can be done like that, but there are some amazing things that can be done like that when you don't require the thing to check back with the mothership. It can make its own decisions from data that's been reposed in it and algorithms that have been reposed in it. You can get yourself into, well, everybody's an expert in self-driving cars except we're not, right? But there are some very interesting problems known to computer science, like trolley problems. Where you have to make a decision. Something bad's going to happen anyway. You have to decide which bad thing is going to happen. Um, you know, we're not, as human beings, we're not as smart as we think we are about explaining our post hoc rationale for the thing we just did. We think when we reframe it that we understand why we made a decision, but the reality is we make it for reasons that are very biological sometimes and that we don't completely understand. And then we rationalize it later after the fact. Well, it turns out AI doesn't do a very good job of that. It doesn't do a very good job of learning from what it just did, other than memorizing what it just did. So if you imagine a scenario where your car that's really smart, and I'm not going to profess to be an expert in self-driving cars, but your car that's really smart is driving towards my car that's really smart. Can we imagine a day when our cars have the ability to discover each other and the permission to share information with each other? And your car, not through Waze, but just our cars talking to each other, can tell my car about traffic conditions ahead of me or dangers or whatever. That would be great. The way it happens now generally is through apps that our cars are talking to that may or may not share the information, and it may have latency. The other direction that I took your question was something called digital twins, where we have the ability to create digital representations of things like, well, the human genome, as we all know, has been sort of encoded, let's put it that way. We've made it computable. We can create a digital twin for a city. We can create a digital twin for a hospital environment. And then we can test things on that digital twin to see how different scenarios might play out. So instead of trying to reorganize the workflow in the hospital, we can try out three different workflows and in this digital twin and see which one works better. And that's actually being done right now. And what comes out is some very interesting models that you never would have thought of. You never would have thought of organizing the way that, I'll say it, AI comes up with, because AI doesn't care about what you care about. It's just trying to optimize data. These are all very exciting things. We tend to anthropomorphize them and put human terms on them, but they're not. They're just math. And so if you do stupid math, you get stupid answers. And so we have to be very careful not to fall in love with these things and say we're going to let AI cure cancer. We can let AI help us cure cancer, right? But we still need our human brains and our human empathy and our human intuition and our human experience and everything that makes us human to work alongside that to do the magic.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that is an important distinction. I mean, one of the things that I see, like you mentioned, the inference computing basically in an autonomous vehicle, there's the computing itself. And I think sometimes the terminology that we have gotten used to is not necessarily always appropriate to what's really happening, right?
Yes.
Because as soon as I say the inference computer in the car is computing the decision making, well, that's partially true if I understand it correctly, but there's also truth to referencing um, scenarios that have happened before, um, analyzing a huge amount of data that is coming in, like in a Tesla from 8 cameras at whatever, like 60 frames a second frame rate and all kinds of things. So there's not just, okay, somebody told me if the light is red, I have to brake to 0. That's kind of what calculating still in triggers in my mind, which is not really what's going on anymore. I mean, I remember the time when Tesla switched from their full self-driving, as they call it, even though that's a horrible name too, 11 to 12, and they switched from basically programmed to neural nets. And that made such a huge difference in the ability to actually survive in this kind of tricky environment, even though it's two-dimensional of driving in cars. I don't want to go too deep into this, but those things, even if they are in the early stages, and maybe it needs to go to AGI, and some people say it needs to go to ASI before we can really even start considering, the impacts properly. But for the regular person that is listening to us, the service, why I do the podcast and invite guests, is to look at what do we need as people who are interested in investing, prepare ourselves for to be in as good a position as we can be when all these exponentially fast happening changes occur.
So one of the phenomena that I have studied a lot in my practice is something I call hyper disruption. Let me define what I mean by that. If something happens that is truly disruptive, COVID is a great example, right? Nobody saw it coming, and I don't know about you, but I didn't know that they could even contemplate shutting down all the businesses and telling everybody to stay home. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know there was a plan for that, right? Um, so something very disruptive like that happens, and immediately we all have to figure out, what do we do? How do we do it differently? How do we keep doing what we're doing to serve our customers, our whoever we're serving, right? And maybe not die and you know serve other people and all of the humanity that's in that. Um, so the world reacts. COVID didn't happen at one time in one place. It happened asymmetrically in different parts of the world. So as each part of the world experienced this wave of the pandemic, they reacted based on the knowledge that they had from other places, their belief in the truth of that knowledge and how much of it was transparent and shared, the available resources that they had. The FEMA uses this model that has a lot of R's in it. Recognize, respond, react, recover. Great. We're all doing that. But the reality is that as one part of the world reacts, they might consume all the respirators that are available, or they might consume all of the whatever, masks, all the things that we were clamoring for. And then the next part of the world doesn't have the same resources. So there's this unartful kind of response that's very lopsided and it becomes competitive very quickly. That's just disruption, and that's pretty bad. I don't know if you remember, but in the middle of COVID, all of a sudden there was a ship stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal.
Yeah, I
Nobody
remember.
saw that coming. That had nothing to do with COVID, but it had a lot to do with supply chains, and it had a lot to do with the ability to distribute information. So now you get this disrupted disruption where something else has happened that messes up the plans that you have in place for the thing that you didn't plan on, that you can't recover from the way you'd like to because of all the other people recovering from it. And now this other weird thing happens. This is what technology is doing to us right now. So Gen AI comes along. By the way, it didn't just come along; it was there all along. But it 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 came out into the public, right, in a very very splashy
Yeah, I
way.
use the
And
analogy of like a mushroom, like it at some
yeah, I mean,
point
it
it
didn't just happen
pops.
overnight, right?
Yeah,
Some of these things have been, contemplated since like the 1950s, but
right.
all of a sudden, let's call it a convalesced. It reached some critical point of inflection, and it became ubiquitous and discoverable are the terms they use in computer science. So it became ubiquitous and it's everywhere and discoverable. You can find it, right? And you can get it if you want it. That's great, but you don't know how to use it. It's just like the first time you used Harvard graphics or PowerPoint, you thought it was great, but you didn't know anything about design, right? And you made these horrible things with it because you didn't know what you were doing. Well, that's kind of what happens, right? And then it gets better, and we get better at it, and we develop vocabulary and so forth, and we respond to that disruption. Well, with technology, the disruptions are happening to some extent faster than we can consume them, and we unartfully consume them, and we generally wind up doing all the low-hanging fruit. So we use it to send more email. We use it to create a chat bot to talk to our customers want to talk to people, but now they're going to talk to the chatbot, and we could save money. Well, great, but is that all you got, right? So we have to find a better way of dealing with this disrupted disruption where we don't finish responding to the prior disruption before the next one happens, and where we have captured learnings that allow us to be 80% ready for the next crazy thing that's going to happen. AI, I liken it to like a teenager. It can start to do things now. Maybe it has its driver's license, right? But it still goes out and gets drunk. It still does things we didn't tell it to do. It still breaks and by the way, we don't necessarily know what to tell it to do. We can't talk to it because it speaks a different language than us. There's a lot of that going on right now. If we get this right, we will have an opportunity to address some very real problems. Some of the folks that I mentioned to you in my background that I have the honor of working with right now are addressing very real problems that address the human condition and using AI to lean into that. I think that's amazing, and I want to help any way I can with that. I don't really care about sending more email. I get too much email now. It's
Yeah,
easy to
me
do.
too. Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's one thing that is probably more direct impacting people that are either already investing or planning to invest. And what I'm thinking in this context is basically displacement, oftentimes motivated by increase in productivity, but sometimes not even the more productivity in the sense, but cheaper productivity, right? Where you could say, okay, I'm paying somebody 50, 60, 70 hours fully burdened, um, and I can get some machine, like some robot. Yes, it may not be quite as efficient from the get-go, but it works basically the three shifts that I would normally not be willing to pay somebody. Where do you see that going, and do you have any kind of timeline in your kind of like applying your expertise to say, okay, is it really as rapidly as some people say, or is it maybe not quite as fast, or somewhere in the middle?
I think it depends on what you do. So for certain things, your question seemed to be leaning towards, excuse me, manufacturing. Um, Certainly, there's a lot of things we can do to automate. We don't seem to have been able to automate certain parts of manufacturing very well. There's certain things that people still do way better than automata, and probably will continue to for a while because packing tape is sticky, and because boxes are all different sizes, and eventually we'll get better and all that. Um, I joke with my friends. I travel a lot, and I joke with my friends that there's two kinds of luggage. There's carry-on and lost, right?
Yeah, we have
All these
always been
systems,
saying.
all
Yeah.
these systems that
Well,
we
yeah.
have,
Right, but I'm
you
not
know.
just thinking about manufacturing. I've been,
Well,
listening
yeah,
to a couple.
that was my preamble, right? I'm
Yeah,
sorry. So there are other jobs where getting displaced is not so obvious. And so the example that I was talking about with customer service is one. And I say I will never report to a robot, but Outlook tells me to go to a meeting and I go. And the GPS
right.
tells me to turn left or right and I turn left or right. So I'm already taking some direction from a robot. How much of that are we willing to give up in the human condition? And what will we do with the time that it frees up? If I'm somebody whose job was displaced by AI, that's tragic because of the job going away. It might also be the best thing that ever happened if I can do something with that time. It very much depends on what you do and how badly you need to be doing it every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also see, and maybe I'm looking a little bit through, rose-colored lenses or something like that. I see, for example, one area, and you tell me I'm full of it or not, but I have always had the impression that if you wanted to fight something legally, that part of the likelihood of success was how big of a legal team can you afford. And I really think that we could get to a point where everybody can basically have access to the full case law of any kind of whatever case you have, because it's all public. It just needs it used to be paralegals, now hopefully an AI that can crank through it in reasonably high speed, but also for a price that normal people can afford and have at least a chance to get similar verdicts. Am I wrong about that?
You may not be wrong in the long term. You're a little bit wrong now. There's been some very public cases that have happened recently where small law firms tried to use it wound up with somebody very far down the food chain who was asked to find the case law on something, and they went in and used Gen AI, and the Gen AI hallucinated and made up cases and citations, and it found its way into a briefing. It found its way into a court, document, and the other side spent a lot of time trying to find those citations that don't exist, and then brought it to the attention of the judge. And it's a very bad day for the lawyer in court whose law firm did that, and that lawyer in court didn't do that. Somebody who works for the guy who works for him or her did that. Um, we are making progress in terms of tagging data that was produced by AI, in terms of triangulating on something that we're going to rely on that we think is true, asking in more than one way. There's a whole science of something called prompt engineering. How do you get to, um, how do you avoid converging on something that the AI will, I'm trying not to say think because I hate using human terms
Yeah.
for autonomy, will be satisfied is what you want. And there's the difference between what I want and what I need, or between what I want and what I deserve. So in law and in medicine, by the way, you want to come up with a differential diagnosis and somebody has some very weird set of symptoms. And there's a lot of AI now that will help you narrow down the field in a situation like that. And in law, there's a lot of AI that will help you get, I'll say, clues as to what the right case law is. But you still have to read that case law and you still have to understand it. And you still need to be a lawyer to interpret it and make sure it's relevant in the context of your case. So I don't know that I want to get to a point where I go on the legal AI chatbot and come up with my defense and bring it to court to the AI jury and ask. No, I think we need jurists in that loop somewhere. Part of jurisprudence is arguably humanity, right? It's not just finding case. You're never gonna, well, not never. You rarely find a case that's exactly like yours. And a lot of times the reason you win or lose is because of the ways in which it's different. And that's where a skilled lawyer will help you. So yeah, it'll help, but I don't think it'll supplant.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. And I would say I'm totally with you at the if we look in current state, I'm not so sure that that will be the reality, let's say 5, 6, 7 years into the future. And not because the things that you raised aren't still potentially relevant, but I also think we have to acknowledge to some extent human nature. Besides the fact that I also hope, at least, and it may be false hope, but I hope that some of those things, that hallucination stuff and so forth, that those things will also get better, not just the compute getting better and faster and stuff like that. Yeah.
I definitely think they'll get better. I don't think we will replace ourselves in our lifetime. Sorry, you asked me for a time frame and I didn't give you a
Yeah,
time frame.
absolutely. And I agree
I,
with you. I'm not
I'm
worried. Looking at what's realistic for me and
not
I
worried
guess
about
for
that.
you.
And I'm not
Yeah.
worried about that in the lifetime of today's children, right? One of the big questions that teachers have is what do you teach that's
Yeah.
still going to be relevant in 3 or 4 years when they graduate? That's a very tough question, but those students are still going to be relevant for sure. The example that popped in my head while you were talking, I know that you're an amazing pilot, um, and you know, I know a little bit about autoflight systems. And notice I didn't call it an autopilot, right? If I had to maintain an aircraft at an exact altitude, it's very laborious. Do that for 9 hours, no, please help me, airplane, right? I don't want to do that. It doesn't mean I stop navigating. It doesn't mean I stop looking out the window. And you hit clear air turbulence, and that auto flight system says, "Your airplane. I don't know what to do with this, right? I
Yeah,
still
yeah,
need a really smart guy in that cockpit. I
yeah.
need you in that cockpit when that happens. And you definitely don't need me in that when that happens. So, we need to figure out where we sit on the airplane.
That's correct. Yeah, I agree with that analogy. At the same time, I also have to say, since I have in those years that I did the flying professionally, gone through the evolution of what those auto flight systems can do. And the last state, which is already 20 years ago, that I had engagements with, was getting to the point where the not just the systems, basically the computer, but what it was connected to started making the difference. Like I don't want to go too far in the weeds, but in
Right.
the Tornado aircraft that I flew, the last version in my last flight or the last couple of months, the data exchange rate was in the multiple hundred millisecond range, and the speed with which any of the control surfaces could be moved was in the below 1 second range. Right, so that the amount of data, the amount of analysis, the amount of sensors, and the ability of the plane itself to react to anything, those things together
Yep.
enabled the auto flight system to do way more than it did when I started 20 years earlier.
100%. And there are aircraft that exist today that cannot be flown without
Oh yeah,
automation.
that tornado was like flying like a brick as soon as you turn off the computer.
But I mean, there's without getting into stuff that
Yeah.
your audience doesn't care about. There are planes, certainly military planes today, that literally are unflyable without the computer. Like you need the computer
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
figure out what
yeah.
to do with all the
Or
control
even the one
surfaces.
20 years ago was unflyable. If as soon as the computer goes out, we had one mode, and that was literally physical sticks with little connectors where you could manually with a hydraulic system move the surfaces, but I would say that was barely flying. Like that was just barely good enough to get it back on the ground without crashing, and that was it.
I had someone that I knew refer to that as controlling the site of the accident.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit like that. Now, coming back to the topic of the show, if you mentioned this one question that is oftentimes being asked, what would you teach or recommend to your kids? If I twist that a little bit to say, what would you suggest to somebody who is investing or is in the process of planning or already started investing in their, let's say, 30s and 40s to keep it realistic? Most people, that's about the age when they really realistically start investing and ask themselves, okay, well, how is this going to look like with this rapid change that I feel and that I experienced in 10 years? In which direction would I be well advised to go to be better prepared? I don't think you can be 100% prepared, but you can be maybe better prepared. What would you recommend?
In terms of making the investment or learning to be a better investor.
Well, one thing that we're finding, and I'm obviously pretty biased because I have a certain program, but
Mm.
I'm looking at it through the lens of saying certain things will still be needed. Right. So one of the things that and we talked about your hotel, some form of shelter, whether it's houses, apartments, something where people live will be needed regardless whether they get cleaned by a robot or they cleaned by a maid or, like just to be a little borderline funny. So, right. In that sense, I think ownership in corporations that have longevity will probably continue to be a thing unless the rules completely change. But that is probably still going to be possible for quite a while. Um, and then, will the Earth continue to accept gold everywhere you go? I don't know, but I think so. So those would be some of the things that I see right now where the question is, okay, if I did ABC, will that position me better for this tsunami of technology versus not doing it?
So, one of the most important skills I think any of us can develop is critical thinking. And critical thinking starts from observing the world around you. In your case, it might be the investment opportunities that you have, and asking an important question. Once you ask that important question, you then challenge what you think the answer is based on all kinds of things. And then when you get that answer, before you fall in love with it, you assess the bias in the answer. What do I have to believe in order for this answer to be true? We don't teach this very well. And as things get easier and easier, and we all do it, you go on your phone and you ask, I'm trying not to use brand names, but you ask Siri or whoever you talk to, or you ask your favorite Gen AI program, whatever, if it's what is the capital of France, probably get the right answer, right? What's going to happen tomorrow in the capital of France? Why would I necessarily believe it would know better than I might if I studied what's going on in the geopolitical environment affecting France? I don't know anything about France. I don't know anything specific about France that I am not telling you. I'm just using that as an example. Um, So we don't do a very good job of understanding what you have to believe and what the bias is. Let me just pick on your example of gold. And this is a little far-fetched, but only a little. Sure, gold is a scarce commodity, and its value goes up and down based on people's perception of risk and all kinds of other things. And it's sort of the fallback that there'll always be gold, and gold will always be a scarce commodity. And depending on how much I trust in the other fiats, I can always go back to gold. Would it be completely outside the realm of possibility that within 40 years we can send a probe to an asteroid and mine the asteroid and bring back what's on the asteroid? Not crazy. Will we do that? I don't know. Probably not. But could we do that if there was enough money in it? Sure. If somebody discovered a an asteroid that had the right components, the right stuff in it, then it was worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. And by the way, there are asteroids like that.
Yeah.
Um, could somebody go out and grab some of that? Yes. What does that do to the scarcity of that commodity? It makes it less scarce. When commodities are less scarce, their value goes down. So, I'm not saying don't buy gold. I'm not saying invest in, space asteroid mining. I'm saying think about what you're betting on. If you're putting all of your eggs in one basket, be it gold, be it real estate, be it domiciles, because people are always going to need a place to live. What happens to hotels when Airbnb gets released? What happens to hotels? What happens to food when DoorDash happens? What happens to metals and mining when they discover a metal in a mine that is way more abundant than we thought? All of these things can be disrupted. So you have to understand what the disruptors might be, how credible those are, how much you're betting on them, how diversified you are, and you got to keep paying attention to your decision after you make it to make sure the world hasn't changed subsequent to that decision. We also do a very bad job of that. The vast majority of people that have any kind of disposable money to invest, they put it in some kind of a fund, they put it with some kind of a fund manager, they put it somewhere, crypto, whatever it is they do, and then they
Right.
don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. That's a really bad idea.
Right. So I think paying attention is really the great message here. And I thank you for that, Anthony. One thing I want to try one more time. If you, having seen so much evolution in technology, had to venture 10 years into the future, looking at the speed of change that we're seeing right now, and you were to try to advise somebody on what kind of assets should you have, not the quantity, but like how do you position yourself so that you have a really good opportunity to do well in that future in a decade from now? Would you have any kind of things where you would say, besides paying attention to what's happening and how fast maybe it's happening, any kind of things that you would shine a light on or focus on?
10 years is a long horizon. People often ask me um, horizon type questions, and it's hard to get that far out with the pace of change. I play a game with people where I say, if I offered you the opportunity to go 100 years into the future or 100 years into the past right now, but you have to stay there for a year, which way would you go? And most people, after they think about it for a while, say, I'll go 100 years into the past because they know what was happening in the past. And I'm not so sure that the future is better. And I'm not saying that there's this dystopian future, but we don't really know how things go. I think it's pretty safe to assume that most of the things that are creating opportunity right now find their way back to power and the production of power and security and the providing of security. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that the world will always need to be safe, and it may be less or more safe in the future, but keeping yourself safe is always something that people need to do. And we want these toys that consume a lot of data, and we've been talking about this the whole time. Data and compute require power. Power impacts the environment. People want more power, but they want a clean environment. We haven't solved that problem yet. Hard to believe that that's not a good place to go invest as well. But what do I know, right?
Yeah, I would say you give yourself less credit than you deserve, would be my first answer. And the second one is if we just add one word and call it the age of sustainable abundance and energy, then that might be a little bit of a path that you can go down. I personally am still convinced that we are going to find solar and the association with like transporting the energy to be the easier solution than fusion. I'm not saying it will never happen. I'm still hoping it's happening in my lifetime, but I think it's so much more complicated than just take the free stuff that comes up every day. You know, and
You know, the amount of energy that we are surrounded with, the amount of free energy that we are surrounded with,
yeah,
solar is a great example. You can see it and you can feel it. There's wind, there's waves, there's the earth getting warmer and cooler, there's uh, cosmic radiation, there's and on and on and on. And in every single molecule, there is more energy than we can even imagine, right? And we have this problem. So, and our solution to it is largely burn stuff inefficiently, right? Obviously, we got to get better about that. And we got to get better about storing the energy because it gets dark at night and it gets cold in the winter. And,
yeah,
all of that stuff is so one of the things you have to believe is it will still get dark at night and it will still get cold in the winter. I do believe that, right? So I don't have a problem basing my a priori assumptions on those axioms because I believe they're axiomatic. But battery technology, power density, storage capability, all of these things are just really hard. So it's easy to say, yeah, harness the sun. Okay, I'm going to harness the sun. Where am I going to put it? Like, oh, put it in a battery. Well, how does that battery work? How do I store it? How do I dispose of it? Those are not easy to measure. What if there's a fire? Everything we do right now has consequence. I hope that we do it with overt intentionality. I think that's the most important thing.
yeah, absolutely. I'm with you, although I'm potentially, if I'm listening to you, slightly more optimistic because certain topics, and I find this has been true in my life at least over and over and over again, if I get interested in something so that I pay attention on a regular basis, I have a pretty good opportunity to follow the evolution that's going on. And when we take something like battery technology, and I started looking at this in the early 90s. And I'm looking at not just the diversity of different ways to store in what we call batteries, but also, how much better we have gotten. You spoken about power density and stuff like that. And I try to avoid to go down that rabbit hole as well. But I think there is a place where we put stuff out there in the areas that are not occupied and harness it and then transport it with less loss than we typically doing it and then putting it in batteries. All of that is available. I have, as you have probably seen, hopefully somewhat elegantly avoided China, but I can't get around the fact that they put 93 gigawatts of renewable energy into their country in the month of July of 2025. Right. And they can transport it, they can store it, they have not just batteries, they have really elegant water storage systems and on and on and on. So, and I'm not saying they have to be the example, but one thing that is interesting to me is when some entity, or you could say a country or the government or whatever, commits to something. And I believe, and I really find it interesting, even though it's not politically observed or mentioned, it's always the opposite. But to me, these guys have committed to what was said in Paris, and they have been working diligently to get there and probably will get there before the 2050 claim that they, or the goal that they set for themselves, even though the economy keeps growing. So there's at least an example where somebody is trying, and that gives me hope. That's all I want to say with that.
I I hope the best for them in that regard.
Yeah.
There are other dimensions to that initiative that we must also consider. And I don't know that we know enough, but I absolutely hope that you're right.
Right, and we don't have to necessarily invest in Chinese electricity generation. We can do this pretty much wherever we feel safe and we like it. I just feel that since you mentioned that would be something
Yeah.
seriously to consider because that's something that is going to be in demand and growing demand.
Yeah, and
So,
I'm not pro or again what they're doing there. I know as much as anybody else does, which is what I read about
yeah,
in and that's never the whole story. I think that it's a very big problem in a country like that because of the demand, and you've got to do something, and at some point you've got to, the expression is pick a horse and ride it, right? So
right, exactly.
yay, right? Yay, they did that. I think we need some time to see what the impact is and what what comes of that. Um, if we kind of zoom out to the rest of the world, there's other places that have similar problems. Lots of people, India, the U.S. has not nearly that many people, but we still have an awful lot of people, and the people we have tend to like a lot of power for stuff. Um, if we're gonna if we're gonna address that demand by anything short of telling people to use more efficient things, which by the way we should do, we got to figure that out. And I don't know that the solution is just make more power. We are so inefficient at the way we use power. It's laughable. It's absolutely, if you look at it from a standpoint of physics and efficiency, and the total cost of owning a battery and the power that you put out in that battery, and if you look at the way that even in nuclear power, you mentioned fusion, right? At the end of the day, all this amazing technology is to make steam and turn a turbine, right? That's all you got. Like, isn't there another way? Like that way has been around for a really long time.
Right.
Could we think about that a little bit? But we're not there yet.
No, absolutely. Although I have to say, and I think we both have to acknowledge that even in existing technologies, however far evolved they are, I've oftentimes thought, okay, is there really anything more? And then I'm thinking about Moore's law and some of the other laws and stuff and come to the conclusion, yeah, like you said earlier, I have given up trying to predict what is technically possible because it's just totally unpredictable that somewhere, some doesn't matter where, which country, which origin or stuff, somewhere someone sits and either through sheer coincidence or because they put the right things together, discover something and recognizes, which I always find is the component that nobody wants to acknowledge that stuff is happening, but do you really recognize its significance? Right. And but assume, okay, somebody does something and recognizes the significance. Um, there's been so many examples that I don't really want to even venture to predict what the next, I don't know, in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, a solution that we can't even imagine right now might exist.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, one that I think you could probably, I'm running the risk of dating. Someone will find this conversation 10 years from now and say, what an idiot. But I'm going to say it anyway. Um, it's, um, it's hard to imagine that a great disruption is not about to happen with quantum computing. And
Okay.
when quantum AI comes along, whatever that is, because no one knows, that will be unimaginably disruptive. And it will allow things that we don't have language or capacity to understand right now, um, to address that future. That future is, I'm going to say, almost certainly coming. And so when you think about computers, for your listeners that may not be familiar with quantum computing, our computers have bytes in them, bits and bytes, and a bit is a zero or a one, and a byte is a bunch of bits. Right? It's that simple. And everything is either one or zero, and all the magic that we use happens from those ones and zeros. In a quantum computer, they have qubits, which are kind of like these little buckets of infinity that also influence each other. It's a completely wacky environment, has nothing to do with a traditional digital computer. The types of algorithms you use, the way you think about computing is completely different. And so things that are computationally impossible or computationally overwhelming become, some of them just become hard or even easy with a quantum computer. So now if we can do things that today are just too hard, they're just computationally overwhelming. If those things become easy, what can your self-driving car do? You're not going to have a quantum computer in your self-driving car in 10 years, but you might have access to one in a really fast cloud environment, right? You might be able to do things that are just magic that we can't imagine today. So that's one. And generally speaking, if there's one, there's more than one. So I would say that there's some other amazing evolutions like that. I've got to believe that there'll be one. AI is assisting the discovery of new drugs and new medical treatments now at a rate that is historically, it would never come close. So I've got to believe that there's some, I hope, pray, and believe that there's some very big breakthroughs there with AI assisted medicine. That's just two. There's probably 10 that we could come up with right now if we just stopped and thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm totally with you there. And I mean, for me, translating it for every everyday listener and person living their normal life is think about how many new materials you find or hear about, even if you don't necessarily apply them. And that has never stopped. It's probably accelerating. And whether you need the current AI compute or if you have quantum compute, to be able to go through what is physically, like you go through the 169 elements and you say, okay, to the order of 168, and then let's just play with them and then do that with 3 and with 4 and with 5 together. I think the limitation has always been you just didn't have the compute power. But if you ever get to something even coming close to run through all these options to see what, and this is why I said earlier, it's not just finding something, but recognizing its significance. I don't know if compute will ever get to that point to actually say, hey, I'm stopping here because there's something significant that I just discovered, or just look at everything with equal significance, so.
Well, I mean, AI already does have the ability to say, I think I just did something significant. There are techniques in AI that allow convergence and picking the best answer and those kinds of things. I just was thinking about technology while you were talking and realizing that with all of my access to AI and all of the things that I do, I'm sitting here writing with a fountain pen. And why am I writing with a fountain pen? A, I love pens, and B, I find that writing with a fountain pen forces you to pay a little bit more attention to writing because it's more like painting with a paintbrush than it is like writing with a ballpoint pen. And I kind of like that. I kind of like the metaphor of stopping and thinking about what you're writing. I think we need to exercise that metaphor with our technology to stop and think about what we're doing with it. And is this the highest and best use of what the human race can do with it? And if our answer is no, we're just selling more shoes and socks. With all due respect to the sellers of shoes and socks that might be in your audience, great, please. I need to buy shoes and socks just like everybody else. But we got to do better. We got to do stuff that we can't do now, not just do things that we can do now and monetize them better by getting rid of the people and making things cheaper so that they break exactly when the warranty expires and all that. I don't care about it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that brings it nicely back to like a human component, right? There will be all the economic stuff and all the technology stuff and so forth, but there is one thing, at least for the foreseeable future, that's human beings with feelings, emotions, interests, searching for community, all those kind of things. And to me, when people ask me how will this future look like, and will everybody just play Starship Enterprise and you go to the replicator and so forth, I think the human component will still, for way beyond my lifetime, play an important role, whether that's writing with a fountain pen or doing things together because it's just more fun to do it in a group than by yourself and so forth. So I really appreciate that you brought it back to that, and the one doesn't replace the other, so I think that's an important thing to realize. So Anthony, I want to really thank you for making time and having this kind of really interesting conversation. I believe we should do it more often. So maybe we can commit to that. And for the audience, is there anything that if somebody wanted to say, hey, this guy was so cool, I want to maybe reach out to him?
Absolutely. Probably the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
if somebody reached out and said they were listening to your show and mentioned it on LinkedIn, I promise when I see it, I'll accept that and we can connect that way.
Yeah, thank you again for being here. And like I said, maybe we do it again next year.
Absolutely. I know you don't like compliments, but you're still one of my favorite people. And I think the world is a better place because you do what you do. So please keep doing it.
Thank you, Anthony. That's a wonderful closing word.